Shadows of the past Trozalin haze adjusted her thrift store dress in the mirror. Wondering for the 10th time why she'd agreed to attend Juniper's family gathering, the dress's simple blue cotton number was the nicest thing she owned, but it would still look woefully inadequate among the designer labels she'd inevitably encounter tonight. "It's just dinner," she told her reflection, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "You've survived worse." At 28, Rosalind had built a life that, while modest, was entirely hers. Her small apartment above the bookstore where she worked part-time sat just 3 blocks from the Coastal Research Center where she volunteered. While finishing her marine biology degree, neither job paid much, but they kept her fed and housed while she pursued her dream of working in ocean conservation. The taxi ride to the Marshall estate took 20 minutes, each passing mile revealing increasingly grand homes until they reached an imposing gate. The driver whistled low. Someone's doing well for themselves. Rosalind's stomach tightened. She'd known Juniper. Came from money, it was evident in her friends' casual mentions of family vacations to places Rosalind could barely locate on a map, but this was different. This was wealth that made her second-hand dress feel like a costume. "Ross, you came." Kana Stelliper's delighted voice rang out as Rosalind approached the entrance. Her friend embraced her warmly, smelling of expensive perfume and genuine affection. "I was worried you'd bail at the last minute." "I considered it," Rosalind admitted, returning the hug. "Your home is ... impressive." "Oh, this old place? It's technically my brother's now. Come on, everyone's on the terrace." Following Juniper through the sprawling house, Rosalind felt the familiar unease that had shadowed her since childhood. Remembered her mother beautiful and hopeful, dating men from good families, who'd never seen her as more than a temporary diversion. She recalled her mother's tears when, inevitably, these men moved on to women from their own social circles, leaving behind broken promises and deepened poverty. "I'd rather be alone than be someone's charity case." Her mother had whispered one night, unaware that 10-year-old Rosalind was listening. It became a mantra that shaped Rosalind's approach to relationships: maintain distance from anyone whose life looked too different from her own. The terrace overlooked the ocean, a view that momentarily distracted Rosalind from her discomfort. Glass lanterns cast a warm glow over elegantly dressed guests mingling around a table laden with food she couldn't name. "There's my elusive brother," Juniper said, steering Rosalind toward a tall figure standing near the balustrade. "Nathaniel, come meet my friend." The man turned, and Rosalind's prepared smile faltered. Nathaniel Marshall didn't fit her image of a privileged heir. His eyes, deep brown and surprisingly gentle, studied her with immediate interest. His button-down shirt was rolled at the sleeves, revealing forearms tanned by outdoor work than leisurely sunbathing. "The famous Rosalind," he said, extending his hand. "Junie talks about you constantly." His handshake was firm but not domineering. "All complaints, I hope," Rosalind replied, surprised by her own easy response. Nathaniel laughed, a genuine sound that softened the sharp edges of her defenses. "Quite the opposite. She says you know more about local marine ecosystems than anyone she's ever met. I just spent a lot of time in tide pools. Worthwhile occupation." Something in his tone suggested he wasn't being patronizing. "I'd love to hear more." As dinner progressed, Rosalind found herself repeatedly drawn into conversation with Nathaniel, despite her best efforts to maintain the emotional distance she'd cultivated over years. Something about his attentiveness, the way he listened as she described her research on coastal pollution, made her walls waver. When the evening ended, Nathaniel walked her to her taxi. "It was genuinely nice meeting you, Rosalind." "Likewise," she replied, surprised to find she meant it, as the taxi pulled away. Rosalind firmly reminded herself of her mother's tearful warning. Men like Nathaniel Marshall didn't seriously pursue women like her. Whatever interest he'd shown was curiosity at best, pity at worst. She wouldn't make her mother's mistake. She wouldn't mistake kindness for something more. Unexpected encounters 3 weeks after the dinner party. Rosalind knelt beside a touch pool at Coastal Haven Aquarium, guiding a group of wide-eyed 5th graders as they gently stroked the shell of a horseshoe crab. "They look scary, but they're actually really gentle," she explained, smiling as a timid boy finally extended his finger toward the prehistorical-looking creature. They've been around since before the dinosaurs, over 450 million years. Like living fossils, came a familiar voice from behind her. Rosalind turned, startled to find Nathaniel Marshall watching her demonstration, hands casually tucked into the pockets of worn jeans that looked nothing like the tailored trousers he'd worn at the dinner party. "Mr. Marshall," she acknowledged, trying to mask her surprise as the children dispersed toward the next exhibit. "This is unexpected." "Nathaniel, please," smiled. That same genuine expression that had momentarily disarmed her weeks ago. "And I'm sorry for the intrusion. Juniper mentioned you volunteer here on Wednesdays." Rosalind straightened, brushing imaginary dirt from her khaki uniform pants. "So you decided to drop by the aquarium on a random weekday afternoon?" "Not random at all. I'm actually here about the rehabilitation center you're trying to establish." He gestured toward a bench nearby. "Do you have a minute?" Curiosity overrode caution, and Rosalind checked her watch. "My next group isn't for 20 minutes. Seated beside him, Rosalind was struck by how Nathaniel seemed different here, more at ease than he'd been at his own home. "How do you know about the rehab center?" "It's barely more than a proposal at this point. I serve on the board of the Pacific Conservation Trust." His eyes lit with genuine enthusiasm. "Your grant application crossed my desk last week. The concept is brilliant, using rehabilitated marine animals as ambassadors for conservation education." Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. The rehabilitation center had been her dream for years, a place where injured sea creatures could recover while educating the public about threats to ocean ecosystems. She'd poured her heart into that grant application. "The board hasn't made decisions yet," Nathaniel continued, "but I wanted to see your current operation firsthand." "This isn't exactly a fair representation," she said, gesturing around the modest aquarium. "We make do with limited resources." That's what impressed me most about your proposal, how much you've accomplished with so little. His expression was earnest, without a trace of condescension. "Would you show me around? As a board member, I should see everything." For the next hour, Rosalind guided Nathaniel through the aquarium's behind-the-scenes areas, the makeshift medical pool, where they currently treated injured sea turtles, the cramped lab where she conducted water quality tests, the education room furnished with second-hand chairs. To her surprise, Nathaniel asked insightful questions about salinity levels and feeding protocols. He crouched beside a recovering pelican, observing its splinted wing with genuine concern. When she explained their limited filtration system, he took notes on his phone. "You clearly love this place," he observed as they completed the tour. "Not about the place," Rosalind replied, surprising herself with her candor. "It's about the work. These creatures don't have voices to defend themselves against pollution, habitat loss, climate change. Someone has to speak for them." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, a deepening respect that made Rosalind uncomfortable in its intensity. She wasn't accustomed to being seen so clearly. "Have dinner with me," he said suddenly. "Not as a board member evaluating your grant, just as someone who'd like to hear more about your work." Every instinct honed by years of self-protection told Rosalind to refuse. Men with Nathaniel's background didn't pursue women like her without ulterior motives, yet she found herself nodding. "Just dinner," she clarified, and somewhere casual. The following weeks, just dinner evolved into regular encounters that defied Rosalind's expectations. Nathaniel showed up at beach cleanups in faded t-shirts, sorting through trash with the same dedication as the student volunteers. He appeared at her tiny farmer's market with reusable bags, asking about sustainable seafood options. When she mentioned an upcoming lecture on ocean acidification, he arrived early, saving her a seat. Never once did he mention his family's wealth or position. In his worn jeans and unassuming manner, he might have been any passionate conservationist. They talked about tide pool ecosystems, debated fishing regulations, and shared their favorite coastal hiking trails. When he spoke of his work, he described it vaguely as environmental consulting. Focusing instead on Rosalind's research and dreams, one evening as they walked along the shore after a community science event, Nathaniel stopped to examine a piece of sea glass, holding it up to the fading light. "My father wanted me to become a corporate lawyer," he said quietly, passing her the smooth green fragment. Couldn't understand why I chose environmental science instead. What made you choose it? Rosalind asked, pocketing the sea glass. Wanted to leave something better than I found it. He looked out at the ocean. His profile softened by sunset. Money doesn't matter if the world it buys into is broken. Something shifted in Rosalind's chest, a dangerous warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. In Nathaniel, she recognized a kindred spirit whose values aligned with her own. His consistent presence in her world, not as an observer, but as a participant, had begun to erode her carefully constructed defenses as they parted that evening. His hand brushed hers, a touch so brief it might have been accidental, yet it lingered on her skin like a promise. Driving home, Rosalind reminded herself that she still knew very little about Nathaniel's actual life. She'd never seen where he lived, never met his friends beyond Juniper, the cautious voice that had protected her. For years whispered warnings about falling for someone whose world remained largely invisible to her. Yet for the first time, Rosalind found herself wondering if perhaps her mother's painful lesson wasn't universal truth, but merely one possibility in a spectrum of outcomes. Worlds apart, the invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Thick cream paper with embossed lettering that felt foreign between Rosalind's calloused fingers. The Pacific Conservation Trust Annual Gala, an evening to celebrate marine protection initiatives and announce the year's grant recipients. Juniper had mentioned it casually the week before, suggesting Rosalind attend as her +1. "You've never seen me in a formal dress for good reason," Rosalind had laughed, imagining herself awkward among society's elite. Had insisted, "Your project deserves recognition, whether it gets funding or not." Now, tracing the gold-edged invitation, Rosalind felt a flutter of possibility. Perhaps her rehabilitation center would receive the grant. Perhaps this was her chance to bring her vision to life. The night of the gala, Rosalind stood before her mirror in a borrowed emerald gown that Juniper had diplomatically called vintage rather than secondhand. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant updo courtesy of Juniper's stylist friend who had refused payment, insisting it was practice. The woman in the reflection looked like someone playing dress-up in another person's life. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. One night of pretending to belong. The hotel ballroom where the gala was held gleamed with crystal chandeliers reflecting off marble floors. Women in designer gowns glided past, trailing expensive perfume and confidence. Men in tailored tuxedos discussed stock portfolios and vacation properties. Rosalind clutched her borrowed clutch like a shield, scanning the crowd for Juniper's familiar face. Rosalind. A warm voice behind her sent a shiver of recognition down her spine. "You look beautiful." She turned to find Nathaniel, impeccable in a tuxedo that highlighted the breadth of his shoulders. But something was different, the casual, approachable man who had helped her collect water samples was now surrounded by an aura of authority that made her step back involuntarily. "Thank you," she managed, suddenly aware of the inexpensive costume. Jewelry at her throat. "I was looking for Juniper. She's running late, some crises at the studio." His smile was the same, yet somehow transformed by this setting. "Can I get you a drink?" Before she could answer, they were interrupted by an older couple approaching with purpose. "Nathaniel, darling, the Prestons are asking about the endowment," the woman said, her gaze sliding curiously over Rosalind. "Of course, Mrs. Winthrop. I'll be right there." Nathaniel turned to Rosalind with an apologetic smile. "Duty calls."
Ow.
"Save me a dance?" Rosalind nodded mutely, watching as he was swept into the crowd, people parting naturally to make way for him. He moved through this world with the practiced ease of someone born to it, stopping to shake hands, laugh at private jokes, accept deferential nods. "That's Nathaniel Marshall," a woman nearby murmured to her companion. "His foundation donated $5 million to the Marine Sanctuary last year. I heard he turned down CEO positions at 3 different companies to run the family's environmental initiatives," came the reply. "Brilliant investment strategy, green technology, is where the real money is now." Rosalind felt the room tilt slightly. Foundation, CEO offers. For months she had been sharing tide pool discoveries and conservation. Dreams with a man she now realized she barely knew. The Nathaniel who showed up in worn jeans to help clean beaches was apparently also Nathaniel Marshall. Environmental philanthropist, and heir to one of the coast's oldest fortunes. She made her way to a relatively quiet corner, trying to process this revelation. Every interaction with Nathaniel replayed in her mind, now colored by this new understanding. Had he been humoring her all along? Was her passion project merely an amusing diversion for a wealthy man playing at being ordinary? The evening blurred into a sequence of uncomfortable moments, polite conversations with strangers, who clearly wondered who she was, overheard snippets about vacation homes and private islands, the subtle evaluations of her appearance by people who could spot an off-the-rack gown at 20 paces. When the grant recipients were announced from a podium bearing the Marshall family crest, Rosalind wasn't surprised to hear the Coastal Haven Rehabilitation Project among them. What did surprise her was the amount nearly twice what she had requested. The audience applauded politely as her name was called, but she remained frozen in her corner, unable to step forward and claim recognition for a project that now felt tainted by charity. Later, as guests mingled over dessert, Nathaniel finally found her on a secluded terrace where she had retreated to breathe air not heavy with privilege. There you are. His smile faltered at her expression. Is everything okay? I've been looking for you. Congratulations on the grant. The board was unanimous. Were they? Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Or was it just you? Confusion clouded his features. The proposal stood on its own merits. Rosalind. You know that? Do I? She gestured toward the ballroom. I don't seem to know much at all. Certainly not that I've been spending time with Nathaniel Marshall, whose family foundation could fund my entire project with what they probably spend on catering. Understanding dawned in his eyes. I thought you knew. Juniper must have mentioned she didn't. Maybe she assumed it was obvious to anyone not naive enough to believe that someone like you would genuinely be interested in someone like me without an agenda. An agenda? Something hardened in his expression. Is that what you think? I don't know what to think. Rosalind wrapped her arms around herself. You've been coming to my world for months, playing at being ordinary? Watching me struggle with limited resources, while all along you could have written a check and solved every problem with the aquarium. That's not how meaningful change happens, he said quietly. And that's not why I came to your world, as you put it. Then why? What could possibly interest you about my life when you have all of this? She gestured broadly at the opulence surrounding them. Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice lowering. Because you see the world as it should be, not as a series of assets to acquire. Because you fight for things that matter with everything you have. Because when you talk about those tide pools, your entire face lights up with a passion. Rarely seen anywhere, least of all in rooms like this. For a moment, something vulnerable and genuine flickered between the Ma connection that transcended social barriers. But then a waiter appeared, addressing Nathaniel deferentially about some donor needing his attention. I have to go, he said, regret evident in his voice. But please, Rosalind, can we talk tomorrow? There's so much I want to explain. Yes, she shook, her head stepping back. I think we've been having different conversations all along, Nathaniel. You've been slumming it with the interesting charity case, and I've been... She swallowed hard. I've been making my mother's mistake. Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her borrowed gown sweeping behind her like a retreating tide. She didn't look back to see the hurt in his eyes, didn't wait for Juniper, didn't say goodbye to anyone. She simply stepped out, into the night, hailed a taxi, and returned to her small apartment where nothing gleamed with wealth, but everything was honestly, unmistakably hers. The next morning, she drafted a formal letter declining the grant. Her rehabilitation center would have to wait until she could fund it without feeling like she had somehow been purchased along with it. Beneath the surface, 3 weeks passed in a blur of work and deliberate distraction. Rosalind threw herself into her research, volunteering for extra shifts at the aquarium and spending long hours in coastal tide pools collecting data. She ignored Juniper's increasingly concerned messages and deleted Nathaniel's emails without reading them. The formal letter declining the grant sat unsent on her desk, her conviction wavering each time she read it over. On a foggy Thursday morning, Rosalind arrived at Broken Shell Beach for the monthly microplastic survey she coordinated. The parking lot was empty save for a mud-splattered truck she didn't recognize. Pulling on her waterproof boots and slinging her sample kit over her shoulder, she made her way down the weathered wooden steps to the shore. A solitary figure stood at the water's edge, methodically collecting something from the sand and placing it in a specimen jar. The broad shoulders and familiar stance made Rosalind's heart stutter before her brain could erect its defenses. "You're trespassing on my research site," she called out, attempting lightness despite her racing pulse. Nathaniel turned, his face unshaven and tired, but his eyes brightening at the sight of her. Gone was any trace of the polished philanthropist from the gala. This was the Nathaniel she'd come to know in worn field clothes, hair tousled by sea wind, hands dirty from honest work. "I didn't think you'd come if I asked," he replied simply. "So you ambushed me instead." Prefer created an opportunity for dialogue. A hesitant smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I've been learning from Dr. Velasquez at the Marine Institute. He says your microplastic sampling method is revolutionary." Rosalind set down her kit, unsure whether to be flattered or unsettled. "You've been talking to my academic advisor. Been trying to understand your world better." He gestured to his collection jar. "I'm not sure I'm doing this right, though. Would you show me?" Against her better judgment, Rosalind found herself demonstrating the proper technique for collecting sand samples to measure microplastic contamination. Their hands occasionally brushed as they worked side by side, each contact sending unwelcome electricity through her veins. "Why are you really here, Nathaniel?" she finally asked, as they labeled the 20th sample. He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. "Because I owe you the truth. Not just about who I am, but about why it matters. To me, that you understand?" A sudden squall sent them hurrying toward a nearby sea cave for shelter. Inside, the sound of rain against the opening created a strange sense of isolation from the world, as if they were suspended in a moment outside of time, sitting on a relatively dry rock ledge. Nathaniel began speaking, his voice barely audible above the storm. "My mother was a marine biologist from a small fishing village in Oregon. She met my father when his company was buying coastal property for development. Fought him at every turn organizing protests, filing environmental impact challenges." Rosalind listened, surprised by this revelation about the Marshall family history. "They fell in love despite everything that should have kept them apart," he continued. "My father changed his business model because of her influence, became one of the earliest advocates for sustainable development. But her family, her community, they never accepted her choice. They saw her as a traitor who'd abandoned her principles for wealth." The parallel to Rosalind's own fears hung unspoken between them. "When I was 12, she took me tide pooling during a visit to her hometown. Someone recognized her and said something cruel, that she'd sold out, that she'd forgotten where she came from. I saw how deeply it wounded her." His voice roughened with the memory. "That night, she told me that the hardest part wasn't the judgment from others, but the fear. That maybe they were right, that maybe she had compromised who she was." Rain pounded harder outside their shelter, creating a curtain of water across the cave entrance. "Is that why you never told me about your family, your position?" Rosalind asked quietly. "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly because when I'm with you, none of that matters. The work matters. The ocean matters. You see me as the person I want to be, not the fortune I happen to be born into." Something shifted in Rosalind's perception, not a complete transformation, but a widening of perspective that allowed for complexities she hadn't considered. "The grant," she said suddenly. "Did you influence the decision?" "I recused myself from voting because of our personal connection," he replied. "But I won't lie to you. Having spent time with you at the aquarium gave me insight into the project that the written proposal alone couldn't convey. I shared that context with the board before stepping back from the decision." Before she could respond, her phone chirped with an emergency alert. The storm had intensified, causing flooding at the aquarium. All staff and volunteers were being called in. "I need to go," she said, gathering her samples. "I'll drive you," Nathaniel offered, ready on his feet. The scene at Coastal Haven was chaos, water pooling in the lower exhibits, staff scrambling to move vulnerable creatures to higher tanks. The power had failed. leaving backup generators struggling to maintain life support systems for the most critical habitats. Without discussion, Lynn and Nathaniel fell into a coordinated rhythm of crisis management. He helped remove Juvenile, Sea Turtle's 2 portable tanks, his strong arms gentle with the fragile creatures. When water threatened the starfish nursery, he waded in without hesitation. Passing specimens carefully to Rosalind for relocation, hours passed in a blur of urgent tasks and split-second decisions. Rosalind found herself repeatedly at Nathaniel's side. Their earlier tension transformed into a wordless partnership focused entirely on saving the animals in their care. He anticipated her needs before she voiced them, remembering details about specific creatures' requirements that she'd only mentioned in passing months ago, when the main pump failed, threatening the oxygen levels in the largest tank. Nathaniel disappeared briefly, returning with equipment from his truck that temporarily bypassed the damaged system. "You carry marine-grade pump parts in your vehicle?" Rosalind asked incredulously. As they monitored the improvised setup, "Ever since you mentioned the aquarium's aging infrastructure," he replied, adjusting a valve. "I thought they might come in handy someday." The realization struck her with unexpected force. This man had been listening, truly listening, all along. Not as a wealthy patron considering a funding opportunity, but as someone who cared enough to prepare for emergencies that weren't his responsibility. As dawn broke, the immediate crisis had passed. Staff slumped, exhausted against walls, while the aquarium's inhabitants continued their silent lives in hastily arranged temporary homes. Rosalind found Nathaniel outside, speaking quietly on his phone. Immediately he was saying, "Whatever they need, this isn't about the foundation. A personal guarantee." He ended the call when he noticed her approach. His clothes were soaked and smeared with algae, his expensive watch ruined by salt water. "What was that about?" she asked. "Emergency repair crews will be here within the hour," he said. "I've arranged for temporary housing for any creatures that need to be relocated during repairs." "Nathaniel, the aquarium can't afford?" "I can," he interrupted gently. "Not as the foundation, not as a grant, but as someone who cares about this place and what it means to you. No strings, no recognition required." In that moment, looking at him standing amid the aftermath of their shared battle, Rosalind saw him. Clearly, for perhaps the first time, neither the casual volunteer nor the powerful philanthropist, but a man whose values ran deeper than the circumstances of his birth. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About the aquarium?" He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Or about you?" The question hung between them, honest and unavoidable. "Both, I suppose, because some things are worth fighting for," he said simply. "Some connections run deeper than the surface differences that should, by all logical reasoning, keep them apart." As the first rays of sunlight broke through dissipating storm clouds, illuminating the damage and the work ahead, Rosalind felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of what separated people and what could bring them together. Across those divides, rising tides the following weeks brought a transformation to Coastal Haven that extended beyond physical repairs. Under Rosalind's guidance, and with Nathaniel's behind-the-scenes support, the emergency became an opportunity for evolution. Damaged exhibits were rebuilt with innovative designs that better showcased marine ecosystems. The antiquated filtration system was replaced with state-of-the-art technology that used less energy while providing superior water quality. Throughout this renaissance, Rosalind maintained a careful professional distance from Nathaniel. They worked together daily, their collaborative rhythm undeniable to everyone around them. Yet she hesitated at the edge of the deeper connection that had begun to form during the storm. One evening, as sunset painted the newly renovated observation deck in amber light, Rosalind found herself alone with her thoughts. The rehabilitation center, her dream project that she had nearly rejected out of pride, was now under construction in the building adjacent to the aquarium. The Foundation's grant, which she had ultimately accepted with strict transparency, conditions had been supplemented by an anonymous community donation that everyone but Rosalind seemed to believe was unconnected to the Marshall family. Penny for your thoughts, came Juniper's voice as she settled beside Rosalind on the bench overlooking the bay. Though inflation being what it is, I should probably offer $1. Rosalind smiled at her friend. Their relationship mended after honest conversations about assumptions and unspoken expectations, just contemplating the view and wondering what comes next. With the center or with my brother, I suppose. Rosalind traced the grain of the wooden bench with her fingertip. The center opens in 3 weeks, your brother. That's more complicated. Juniper's expression softened with understanding. You know when our mother died, Nathaniel changed? He was 19, suddenly thrust into a legacy he wasn't sure he wanted or deserved. Everyone saw him as the martial heir, not as himself. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Until you, me. Rosalind looked up in surprise. The first time he mentioned you after that dinner party, his entire face lit up. Not because you were impressed by him, quite the opposite. You challenged. Him saw through the surface to what actually matters. Juniper squeezed her hand. Do you know how rare that is in his world? Before Rosalind could respond, her phone buzzed with an alert from the construction site. The tidal pools for the rehabilitation center were experiencing unexpected issues with the water intake system. She needed to go immediately. At the construction site, Rosalind found controlled chaos. Workers clustered around the main basin, where the artificial tidal mechanism was failing to maintain proper water levels. The project manager looked relieved at her arrival. Dr. Velasquez from the Institute is on his way, he explained. But we need decisions now about whether to continue filling or to drain completely and reassess. As Rosalind evaluated the situation, calculating risks to the timeline versus potential structural issues, she became aware of someone working alongside the engineers. Sleeves rolled up, examining blueprints with focused intensity. The problem isn't the intake, Nathaniel was saying, pointing to a section of the schematic. It's the outflow gradient. The natural tide is working against our artificial cycle instead of complementing it. Rosalind moved closer, listening as he outlined. A solution that would harmonize the rehabilitation pools with the natural tidal patterns rather than fighting against them. It was brilliant and exactly the kind of holistic thinking she had emphasized in her original proposal. When did you become an expert in tidal engineering? She asked when the immediate crisis had been addressed and the workers dispatched with new instructions. Nathaniel looked up, a smudge of concrete dust on his cheek. Around the time you mentioned that your rehabilitation concept depended on mimicking natural tidal conditions. I've been studying similar systems in rehabilitation centers around the world. The simple statement struck her with unexpected force, the realization that, while she had been keeping emotional distance, he had been investing himself in understanding every aspect of her vision. They walked together along the perimeter of what would soon be the main rehabilitation pool, now quiet as evening descended. Why didn't you tell me you were consulting on the engineering? She asked. Would you have accepted my input? His question wasn't accusatory, merely honest. Rosalind considered this. A month ago? Probably not. Would have seen it as overstepping or charity or ... And now? She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Now I understand that expertise isn't devalued by the circumstances of the person offering it. Was my blind spot, wasn't it? I was so afraid of being seen as a charity case that I couldn't recognize genuine collaboration. Nathaniel's expression softened. We all have blind spots shaped by our experiences. Mine was assuming that my background would speak for itself, that you would somehow intuitively understand my intentions without me having to be vulnerable enough to explain them. The setting sun cast long shadows across the construction site, transforming utilitarian concrete into something almost beautiful in its potential. In 3 weeks, this space would welcome injured sea creatures, offering them healing and a second chance. I received a job offer yesterday, Rosalind said suddenly. Director of Marine Conservation for the Pacific Northwest Alliance. It would mean overseeing initiatives across 3 states, working with policymakers, researchers, indigenous communities. That's incredible, Nathaniel replied, genuine pride warming his voice. It's perfect for you. It would also mean leaving the rehabilitation center just as it's opening. She turned to face the ocean, the eternal tide pulling and releasing the shore in its ancient rhythm. Everything I've worked for, finally within reach, and now this opportunity that I never imagined possible. What will you do? Depends. She took a deep breath, finally voicing the fear that had been circling her thoughts. The job is based in Seattle. I'd be starting over in a new city, building new connections. And I wonder if certain connections here are strong enough to withstand that kind of distance. Understanding dawned in Nathaniel's eyes. You're worried about us. Is there an off? Us. The question emerged more vulnerable than she had intended. Instead of answering immediately, Nathaniel reached into his pocket and withdrew a smooth piece of sea glass. The same green fragment he had given her months ago on the beach. You dropped this the night of the gala, he said, offering it to her. I've been carrying it, waiting for the right moment to return it. Rosalind accepted the sea glass, its edges now polished completely smooth by time and additional handling. Most people would have just let it go. I'm not most people. His voice was quiet but certain. And what exists between us isn't something I'm willing to let go, not because of distance. It's not because of different backgrounds. Not because of anything except your choice. My choice. You asked if there's an us. I believe there is, but only if you want there to be. He took a careful step closer. I fell in love with you because you fight fiercely for what matters, because you see value in broken things that can be healed, because you've built something meaningful, despite every obstacle. Taking that job wouldn't change any of that, would just be another expression of who you are. The word love hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned by qualification or expectation. I've spent my life believing that people from different worlds can't build something lasting together, Rosalind said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My mother's heartbreak became my caution. But standing here now, I realize she wasn't wrong about the challenges. She just never found someone willing to build a bridge across the divide. She looked out at the rehabilitation center, then back to Nathaniel. I'm going to take the job. Need to know I can stand on my own. Accomplishments, make my own mark. Something flickered in his eyes. Not disappointment, but understanding mingled with question. But I also want to see where this goes, she continued, reaching for his hand. Not as Rosalind from the struggling background and Nathaniel from the wealthy family, but as two people who share values that matter more than where we started. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and solid. Bridges go both ways, he said simply. Seattle isn't that far. The Marshall Foundation happens to have conservation initiatives in the Pacific Northwest that could use more expert guidance. Rosalind laughed, the sound carrying across the water. Are you suggesting you'd follow me? I'm suggesting that when you find someone who sees the world the way you wish it could be, distance becomes just another problem to solve together. His free hand gently traced the curve of her cheek. It's like fixing a broken tidal pool or saving an injured turtle or figuring out how to people from different backgrounds build something neither could create alone. As the last light faded from the sky, Rosalind stood on the threshold of her newly expanded world, a world where professional achievement and personal connection weren't opposing forces but complementary strengths. The tide was rising around them, but for once, she wasn't afraid of being swept away. I'd like to kiss you now, Nathaniel said softly, if that's okay. Rosalind smiled, closing the distance between them. I thought you'd never ask. Their lips met as the first stars appeared above the ocean. Witnesses to a connection that had grown not despite their differences, but through the understanding that had bloomed beyond them, like the sea glass they had found together, once broken, but made beautiful by the very forces that should have destroyed it. Their bond had been strengthened by the tumultuous journey that brought them to this shore. In that moment, Rosalind finally understood what her mother had never discovered. Love wasn't about erasing the space between different worlds, but about building something new in that space, something that honored both shores, while creating its own unique territory in between.